Hello, everyone. We're on. Great. Welcome, everyone. As people start filtering in, I'll get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited for this conversation we're having today. Before we get into things, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're going to be talking about the impact that this new technology, generative AI in particular, is having on creative work. What we're talking about is very of the moment, but it's worth situating that in a broader context and history of human creativity. For almost 30,000 years, Aboriginal people in Australia have been making art and telling stories. But while we're going to be talking about how technology is changing creative work, it is really worth saying that creativity and making art is part of being human. And we can look to Aboriginal people's history in this country as a living demonstration of that. And while I believe there's an indestructibility to human creativity, we also need to be active in preserving and supporting that for future generations. And that's part of what reconciliation is about. This conversation, in a small way, is about that. It's about looking at what needs to stay human. And there's a lot we can learn from how essential and inseparable art and storytelling continues to be for culture, for language, and law for Aboriginal people. So please join me in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are each meeting from today. For me, that's the Larrakia people up here in Darwin in the Northern Territory. And I'd like to extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands that you're all from and pay respect to their elders, past and present. And to any Aboriginal people tuning in today, or First Nations people overseas. Thank you for your continued custodianship and connection to country. It makes this such a beautiful place to live and work in. Hello, everyone. My name's Joe. I'm the Creative Director at Portable. We're a design, technology, and creative partner for communities and organisations across the country who are working to improve the public systems and services that matter most. We seek out areas of social need and policy failure, and we innovate to create better access and support for our communities across areas like arts and cultural institutions, education, health, transport, access to justice, and beyond. Why we're here today is driven by our desire at Portable to make space for better conversations out in the open about the issues impacting the intersection of technology, society, and practice. We publish reports, we run our own research and innovation programs, we host events, and we share our insights so that we can collectively level up and solve bigger and better challenges that are impacting Australians. That's my spiel about Portable and why we're here. But the topic I want to introduce today, and what I've brought this fantastic group of people together to discuss. The last 12 months have seen a shift in the ability for generative AI to make convincing images and video in seconds. And that's changing what creative work is worth, who makes it, and whether we can believe what we see. Models like ChatGPT now make convincing image generation accessible to anyone with a phone, and producers across Hollywood and beyond are investing billions in integrating this technology into image making and storytelling at scale. Commercial artists and practicing creatives are in a similar place to many professions where they're unsure what space we allow this new technology to occupy in our practice, how we wrestle with the ethical, environmental, and creative compromises that these tools force us into, and how we discern and preserve what's essentially human in an increasingly synthetic landscape. So there's some real concerns sitting in the backdrop of this conversation. I want to acknowledge them before we get into it, because I think it's important to name them, because we're not going to be able to focus on or solve all these issues, but they're really useful and valuable and important context, essential context to have. One being that there's an environmental cost to running this technology. And there's a recent local example up here of a 185 hectare site, 30 kilometres south of Darwin, has just been proposed for a 40 billion, 2 gigawatt AI hyperscale data centre. And there's lots of conversation about the environmental impact of that, as well as the impact on country for First Nations people. There's copyright IP issues. These companies built their models on the works of millions of artists and image makers without consent, and the ground is now moving under our feet. 8 days ago here in Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called training AI and creative work without permission theft. And he announced a new Office of AI to write the rules about that. But two things about that gap are worth holding on to. That legislation is still not due for another year at least. So the intent is declared, but the protection isn't built yet. And even when it comes, it's aimed at what goes into building those models in Australia, the training of them, not those of us using them, and certainly not those overseas. So we're protecting creators as suppliers while leaving them largely on their own as users. And everyone making work with these tools is operating in that gap. Also want to acknowledge that there are ideologies driving companies like OpenAI and others, and the tactics they use to expand and create a sense of inevitability and mass adoption with these tools, often with disregard for social responsibility and the potential for harm, or the question I often hear, nobody asked for this. And then, of course, there's a proliferation of AI slop now impacting the images that communities, young people are making and exposed to, and what this is doing to perception and value of the visual image. Just the other day, I came across our old primary school where my kids used to go. We saw a flyer produced, and I'm sure many of you come across these kinds of things, the ChatGPT flyer that looks the same as many others, and was very, disappointing to know you've got a font of creativity, around you with young people, and yet people relying on these kinds of easy to create assets and design to communicate. And there are also wonderful things happening with these tools now. Lots of experimentation, people really wrestling with what it means to create with these tools, what it means to make a living using these tools integrated into practice. And we're not here to ignore the the issues I just mentioned, nor are we here to resolve them. But we need to acknowledge that anyone using these tools is wrestling with this complex web of challenges, whether they're aware of it or not. And so today's conversation is about sitting in the space between hype and doom, where the harder, more interesting questions live. We're here to wrestle with the tensions, not settle them. So to help our conversation today, I also want to create one distinction, which is that there are two ways we can talk about AI technology and its impact on creative practice, and they might come up in our conversation. There's a difference between using AI to generate the finished product. So we can call this like synthesis, where we're generating something new from a prompt, or using it inside our creative production process, where we're using AI to transform or refine or process existing creative work. And we can call that remediation. Thanks, Bhautik, for those terms. I'm now delighted to introduce you to our brilliant panelists joining us today from across professions working in this space. Welcome Bhautik Joshi, who's a creative technologist who's worked with Adobe, Industrial Light and Magic, and currently is an R&D lead at Canva, which is a product many of you might be familiar with that's making creative and visual design tools accessible at scale. For the past decade, Bhautik has been looking at how neural networks and AI technology can be used to innovate how we make images, and works at the intersection of human creativity, creative tools, and the technology that sits behind them. Welcome, Bhautik. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Dr. Anna Broinowski is one of Australia's most acclaimed political and countercultural documentarians. Anna's work explores the illicit, subversive, and bizarre, including Forbidden Lies, Aim High in Creation, where Anna explored North Korea, and Pauline Hanson, Please Explain, amongst other works. Anna's been the recipient of a Walkley, 3 AFI AACTA Awards, the Al Jazeera Golden Award, and a Writers Guild of America Award. Anna's work challenges our ideas of truth and art, and repurposes the propagandist tools of those who seek to blind us for the pursuit of truth, which is precisely one of the tensions we're here to explore. Thank you for joining us, Anna.
Thank you very much for having me, Joe. Great panel.
And Dr. Christen Cornell is a research fellow and research partnerships manager at Creative Australia, previously a researcher and lecturer at University of Sydney across cultural policy, urban studies, and inter-Asia cultural studies. Her work translates between policy, research, and creative practice, advising the Australian government on arts and cultural policy. Christen brings current Creative Australia research on how AI is actually affecting creative workers and industries, and how the public perceives and feels about it too. Welcome, Christen.
Thank you so much, Joe.
And Tyrone Estephan is Executive Director of alt.vfx, one of Australia's leading visual effects studios, ranked the #1 post-production company in Asia Pacific at the 2021 Immortal Awards. With a VFX background spanning feature films, including the Lego Movie, Tyrone has worked across AR, VR and AI experiences, game development, and major brand campaigns for the likes of Facebook, TikTok, and Sony Pictures. He also co-founded TNDA, a studio built around emerging creative technology, which has just launched its own generative AI production toolkit. Tyrone's deep in the craft of visual production at scale, and is involved in the real commercial decisions AI is forcing right now. Welcome, Tyrone. Really pleased to have you here.
Thanks, Phil.
That's my housekeeping over. So we're going to jump into a chat now, and I'll facilitate with some questions. The last 10 minutes, we'll have a Q&A. So I do encourage you, all those watching, as you're listening, if there's thoughts or ideas or questions coming up, please pop them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get to what we can in the last 10 minutes. We won't be able to get to everything, but if there's more questions, we can think about a way we can follow up on some of those. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump into some questions now, and as each of you respond, folks, to these, I'd love you to actually just start open with the kind of where are you coming from when it comes to this technology? Like, what's your kind of stance? Where do you sit on between that kind of hype and doom spectrum, or pragmatism and purism, and how you're currently navigating this technology? So have a think about that just by way of introducing yourself and your perspective as I ask these questions. So to open my first question, every big shift in image making has gotten called a threat before it got absorbed as a tool. So we can think about the camera, Photoshop, CGI. There's always this sense of like, oh, this is ruining creativity. This is going to destroy art. But what we find often is that it integrates and helps us, it actually pushes creativity forward in new ways that we couldn't have seen. So the easy move is to say that generative AI is just the next one of those. It's the next tool. It's the next camera. It's the next Photoshop. It's the next CGI. But as you're all aware from past conversations we've had, I'm not convinced about that. And Bhautik, when you and I spoke a few weeks back, you said something that stuck with me, which is that we've been sold this as an oracle, this infinite thing that can conjure anything, when it's really a product made by product designers who are making decisions about what it does. And so I want to start there. Is this just the next tool in a long line of creative tools, or is this something different qualitatively in kind? And what changes that at the moment anything can be generated?
All right. Well, again, thank you for having me. Really lovely to be on the panel here with all the rest of you lovely people. So I think in terms of where I stand on this, I think it's worth contextualizing it by just actually answering the question, right? So, you know, and maybe looking at some of the history of this and where it came from. So if we look at the history of where all of this came from, if we look at this current generation of technology, it really started in earnest about 15 years ago with everything that started happening with deep learning. And if we look at specifically sort of like the image and video and audio generation space, the job was to build these networks that were able to see, right? They were able to, literally the job was classification, right? You should look at a picture and go, is this a cat? There's a lot of research into cats. And really it was, that was the primary thing, right? So it was just about building these really big networks that were able to sort of effectively give a computer eyes, right? To be able to see. And, you know, already back then, you know, there were biases that creeped into it, right? We understood that it was a function of the training data, right? It couldn't exceed what it was given. And there was this thing that happened about 10 years ago where folks just almost as a joke put a text box in front of it and thought, okay, instead of classifying it, what if we ran it in reverse, right? Because the way it was trained was you'd have pairs of bits of information. You'd have an image and then you'd have a few words that were describing what it was. So we said, okay, what if we just gave it the few words and see what pictures it started to make? And that became what we know as sort of like diffusion models and all of that, you know, that generates videos and images, right? So again, that limitation that it being a function of the training data that went in hasn't gone away. It's always been there. And in particular, sort of like as the field developed, the only reason that any of this works is this property called generalization, right? And the idea being that when you train these models, you need to have an opinion about what you think is good, what you think is important, right? So you're already embedding a bias around what you think a good picture looks like, what you think like a good edit looks like, what you think a good video looks like. And then what you do is that you train towards that little subset that encodes that aesthetic opinion. And that aesthetic opinion is made by people. It's made by product managers, it's made by designers, right? So when you go from, for example, like one chatbot to the next, and you have preferences, most of the time your preferences are the preferences for the human on the other side of it, the person that said, okay, I'm going to make this more or less sycophantic, I'm going to make this more or less straightforward, I'm going to make this so that it has, it tends to generate more colorful pictures rather than the other way around. So that conditioning is sort of there. So in terms of how I feel about all of this, really, it's worth noting that these are finite tools, and that makes it, because it is finite, that makes it our tool among a series of many that we've had along the years, right? Like again, deep learning has been in image making and computer graphics, at this point for 15 years, right? So this is sort of like a natural, I really, not to discount sort of all the myriad problems that come with it. In many ways, this just feels like a natural walk along that path. And, will something else come along to supply it? Very likely. Very likely.
So I'm curious what this means for the people using these tools, where, we want to be able to master the tools that we use for creativity and really understand their limitations, as you say. But a lot of these aesthetic decisions that are baked in are they're not transparent to people using them, right?
Correct.
So what does that mean for us, for people using the tools and wanting to, I guess, refine and master them? And like, what does that mean for what it feels like and the decisions that they would make, creative decisions they would make?
So I'm going to use a little bit of a niche gaming analogy. My apologies in advance, right? But like you have these what's called open world games, right? And in theory, what you can do is that you can run around. They're supposed to have like no boundaries, but sometimes the map that you have that you're running around on is just very, very large, right? And you explore and you explore and you explore, and all of a sudden you bump into the edge of the map, and you have that little bit of cognitive shock when you realize that it's finite. Or you run through the map and you realize you're just seeing a bunch of repeating things rather than actually seeing something that is infinite. So I think it is important to sort of use these tools to really get pardon my use of the term, get a vibe for where the edges are, right? Because it can't do everything. And I think there is something to be gained from experimenting and trying these things out and really figuring out, does this solve my problem? Right. And if that doesn't solve your problem, then just developing the intuition, the prudence to be able to go, okay, this is not doing it. I need to move on to another way of solving this creative problem, rather than trying to smash your way through the middle and just assuming that the model is going to know it. Right. So I guess if I had any one little nudge there, is learning when to quit. Basically, okay, this is not working. I need to stop and try something else. Like, or I need to use a completely different tool, or I need to switch to a completely different way of authoring it because it's not doing what I want. Right. And that's because it fails in these sort of like very odd kind of ways, right? If it doesn't know something, it will generate something that vaguely approximates it. That's horrifying, right? And there's no explicit signal that says, I don't know this, right? Like the failure mode is so strange and odd. The key here is developing the intuition to sort of like when to walk away from it. And then, that you don't necessarily have to do that yourself. Talk to your peers who have tried it, like, share what you've learned, share your intuition, and working together as a community to understand, okay, how do we situate this? And that craft knowledge that will emerge from it, that is already emerging from it, is a way of sort of developing, I think, a healthier relationship with all of this.
Thanks, Bhautik. Tyrone, I'm curious from your perspective as someone trying to bring this into a production process, working with a team with varying levels of motivation, acceptance, maturity, interest in working with these tools, what your experience is like, building on what Bhautik's been saying about, mastering these tools and understanding the limitations of them. Curious what you've learned from trying to bring this into your work, and maybe giving a bit of context about what that looks like for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree with Bhautik more. I think he's quite astute with what he's saying. Look, I guess it's been a bit of a journey in the 15 years, as Bhautik says, where it's kind of become a little bit more in our day-to-day toolkit of using AI to do the work we do. Obviously, it's improving at a rapid rate weekly. So yesterday's news is not this week's news in terms of how we use it. So, but the fundamentals, it's exactly what Bhautik says, and I'm definitely very, like, on a personal level, I've kind of been one of the driving forces of using it in I guess, company and industry. And the reason for that really is more for the creative possibilities. So for me, being more of a producer and less of an artist, but with a creative spirit, for me, it was just a great way of kind of sidestepping the traditional pipelines a little bit of what we do in visual effects and saying, well, here's something interesting here that we can use. And not just AI, but, all sorts of emerging technologies. And then as AI has kind of developed more, exploring those creative possibilities and, being wowed by, the technology as it advances. So that's kind of the positive vibe of bringing it in and using it and just reaching for creative possibilities. But then the practicality of it and I guess then doing work of a high standard that you can be proud of or, I guess put out into the world, I guess with some pride and also with some ethical thought behind it as well. I guess that gets a little bit trickier and a little bit harder because the tools, I think, but partly maybe because they are constantly moving, you can never quite catch your own tail with what it is. And so the way you use it, I guess the rules of engagement are always changing. And so I'm kind of waffling a little bit because it's such a big question to answer, but I guess practically speaking, like what I found is that when we started using it for creative possibilities and we were doing lots of cool stuff. And it wasn't really trying to emulate the work we'd done before. That was our initial engagement with it. And I was quite proud of some of the work we did then. And to be honest with you, although we're high in visual effects and high sort of with the pictures we make and the visuals we make, the way we started first using AI was not trying to replicate those high-end images and more trying to get some sort of human interactivity with the images or use big data to kind of drive a picture or something like that, where it was just a unique way of doing it. But as it got more and more basically in everyone's hands and on everyone's mobile phones, as you say, I think people started using it more traditionally. I personally found that a little bit disappointing because it's kind of like, and I think that's where you get into that kind of sloppy world. Where
when you say traditionally, what do you mean?
Well, people are using the tool to make, try to make, the Odyssey on their phones. You know what I mean? And so they're doing it. And so for me, I find that interesting when it's unique and different. But when you're trying to actually present it as like a beautiful picture, it's not obviously not going to compete with Christopher Nolan, going on set and doing it, on film and all that sort of stuff. So there is a gap there, but I think people are fighting for that gap, and people are trying to claim that it can do a lot of things that like I guess that's what everyone's trying to push for, and I guess the cynic in me feels that although the technology's creative possibilities are definitely there, and I embrace them very quickly and continually use it, and I do feel in visual effects always since the industry started to this day, like our whole thing is about how you use technology to create pixels, I guess, and stuff. So we embracing it and finding new tools to tell stories is core to the fabric of what we do. But the cynical in me feels like the people making it or selling it to us as a tool are probably more in it for the money. Do you know what I mean? That's a bit of a money grab, and that's a different conversation, I guess. So I definitely have a lot of apprehension to using it as well. And the more we get deeper we go into it, and the more it actually gets integrated into our pipeline, and the more people in our business that use it. And it's gone from like 4 people using it for many years in our business to like almost the entire business is now using it in some way. We've got like roughly 100 artists. You know what I mean? Like now that it's being adopted on such a large scale that I'm kind of liking it less because you're kind of seeing it used in ways that maybe that I don't agree with necessarily. Or I think exactly what Bhautik was saying is that people kind of doing it and kind of miss, and I'll often think, well, why are you using it for that, or why can you stop?
Give an example, even without getting into specifics of like where you've seen it used in a way that you've been less than pleased with.
Um, well, I, ca I can't give you any really juicy examples off the top of my head, but like really basic ones. Let's call them metaphors and not really concrete examples. But I'll get production companies saying, well, the best example is like almost every script I get to quote these days comes with can it, we want to use AI or can it be done in AI? And that in itself is painful. It's like, why is that even part of the initial conversation or part of the brief? It makes no sense to me. You know what I mean?
Were people asking you previously for were people briefing you to use specific tools prior to AI?
No, never. No, never. They've come to us for advice on what tools to use potentially.
Sure.
Like we need to shoot down
So
in
do you think
Cornell and
assumption
have a
baked
direct.
the assumption baked into that question is, can I get it cheaper?
I think that's a big part of it. Yep, for sure, absolutely. And this is the thing. It's like we're shooting. We need to do a scene where two people are walking through the park. Can we use AI? You know what I mean? And then you're like, well, why wouldn't you just get a camera and shoot two people walking in the park? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean that's a real example. Like I
Yeah.
have these conversations multiple times every day now.
Yeah.
And really the conversation should just be like, we're trying to shoot two people in the park and this is the emotion we're trying to convey in the story this is saying. You know what I mean? So that's just one example, but there are all sorts of examples. It's kind of like, why did you just make a spreadsheet? You know what I mean? Why have you come to me with it? With an application that doesn't work? You know what I mean?
Yes, I was struck by in previous conversation with you sharing that your job is to fool people that something not real is real, right? You're doing visual effects, and AI is another tool in regards to that. And I want to go to Anna, because Anna, I know you're playing with similar ideas and thought and around truth and what is real, and you have been doing so long before this technology. So I'm curious, for you, what happens to truth when the image is no longer proof, and how are people, yourself included, using these tools deliberately in their work?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, I mean, I got into this through the deep fake Tom Cruises, and that was when I was first fascinated. So, deep fakes for me was my entry point. And just kind of riffing on what Bhautik was talking about with the history of AI tools, if you look at deep fakes separate to that, they're basically simulacrum, right? They're digital doubles. And the history of that in human art goes right back to the ancient Greeks with their puppets. And then you have the automata of the 18th century. And then you have Andy Serkis, the digital golem, right through to Elon Musk being deep fake to sell, cyber fraud scams. So that was my interest. But as I got into that, I realized that, and I'm not alone. Basically, there are two very divergent responses to AI in screen, AI screen tools. And the first one is focused on deepfakes, and it's basically the voice of doom that says we are entering a world of reality apathy, a kind of truth agnosticism where no one cares anymore because seeing is no longer believing. So the former gold standard of evidentiary truth, the eyewitness video, the thing that gave us the riots over George Floyd, over Rodney King, that's gone because liars or bad actors, and I'm not going to name the president of the most powerful nation on earth, can play the liar's dividend and say, well, actually, my rally was bigger. That's all a deep fake. So what does that mean for truth, right? And why that's relevant to your question, Joe, is I'm a documentary maker, but I work in nonfiction in a hybrid fashion. So I don't see that there's anything less truthful about asking a character to act a fantasy that they might have, as opposed to just doing the 7:30 report style with the obligatory photos and the talking head interview. What is truth on screen? What is screen authenticity? And that's where I get excited, because the other story about AI in creative work is it is just another tool. It is a continuation of cinema's fascination with verisimilitude and persuasion and what can we do. And in a world where really deep fakes and AI propaganda has been elevated to this kind of normalized state in the 24/7 news cycle, right, by the President of the United States, and everyone else is following, there's also a question to be asked, which is, to fight back against these very powerful forces that are now using AI manipulation, digital doubles, etc., to manipulate us? Should we be using those weapons against them? So that brings me to documentary. Can I, as a documentary maker, use deepfakes to satirize powerful public figures in order to make people think differently about what they're doing? And how would I do that ethically and responsibly, right? So one answer is obviously declare your uses, and that's something that I'm doing in a project I'm developing right now, which is kind of speculative nonfiction about space billionaires, where I am hoping to deepfake the tech bros, but let the audience know, and also have the masks peel off so that the actors become part of the plot. The other is to get consent. And there are a lot of ethical guidelines now that documentary makers in particular, the American Archives Producers Association, for example, Netflix, BBC, they've all brought out guidelines about how do we use these tools ethically in nonfiction storytelling. Consent is not possible when you're trying to deepfake a tech bro who's perhaps doesn't have an appetite for being, satirized or lampooned, even though they may be a free speech advocate and put slopaganda and deepfake pornography all over their platform. So it's a very gray area. And I believe that it comes back to a moral compass question, which creatives always have. This is a tool. How do we use it for what might be a benefit for our audiences and the culture in which we're producing our work? Or how do we use it for malign purposes? So for now, at least, those questions still rest with the human users of this technology. And I completely agree with Tyrone. It's not some kind of supernatural, unstoppable force, this techno-determinism that Silicon Valley is ramming down our throats to make us just blindly allow them to put up data centers and use our aquifers and steal our data. That is just marketing hype. There is no question, Joe, that this can also be regulated like every other technology you talked about that have generated similar forms of moral panic since the beginning of art.
Thank you, Anna. I'm really curious about. I think there continues to be a really strong binary reaction I'm noticing from audiences to AI-generated art or creative product, content, whatever it might be. People who will just not go near it at the slightest sniff. And I'm curious about that and how audiences are perceiving the value of work, even when it's thoughtfully produced, or turning the tools against the people who may be using them to manipulate, and whether what is that just a slow turning of the tide, or are we really seeing a bifurcation here when it comes to perception of value of creative means?
I think that the perception of value of human produced work is absolutely valid and must be kept up on a pedestal. There's no question. I think an absolutist response to AI is just don't go there. There's something evil, just lacks nuance, and in fact, in the long run, is going to be anti-creativity. These tools are here, and not only that, they are enabling artists, in particular documentary makers, to speak truth to power, to do things that, people on the progressive side of art, perhaps, who are very anti-AI, might be surprised to know about. And there are like 5 that I've got that I just think are extraordinary and couldn't have been made without AI. For example, Welcome to Chechnya is a film about the gay and lesbian victims of pogroms in Chechnya who are smuggled to Russia to save them. The filmmaker David France gave these characters deepfake masks rather than doing conventional pixelation or silhouettes. And he made the masks a bit blurry. And so what he was able to do with the technology is symbolize the masks that gay and lesbian people must wear daily to survive in that environment, and at the same time protect his subjects. There's Thunderbirds, you know, the puppeteer, wonderful doco that came out, I think 2 years ago now in England, called Jerry Anderson, Life Uncharted, where the filmmaker actually got consent of the family to take real audio of Thunderbirds producer Jerry Anderson and then create a posthumous deepfake interview, lip syncing the audio. So, in other words, puppeteer the puppeteer in an intimate interview, tastefully done, not sloppy. Couldn't have been done with an actor, only could have been done with deepfake. Satire, Putin, 100% deepfake of its titular hero, deepfaking Sam Altman. You know, these are all why I'm fascinated about AI in doco is paradoxically, doco is the truth-telling cousin to fiction and drama, has to declare its uses in a way, whereas fiction, all our fiction colleagues, they're all using AI, but they're doing it invisibly. When you use it in doco, you're forced to actually reckon with that very question you asked. What is screen truth? What is authenticity? And should we even care? Which is the longer question for anyone who has kids, to be honest.
And what responsibility do we have as the storyteller as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you're pointing there too as well is like in terms of that audience perception is perhaps a pretty low resolution discernment and taste around what's created with these tools at this moment. That's why we're getting this binary, because people have been exposed to the simple, well, let me do what you could do, you know, let me replicate and synthesize what had previously been done in a human-made way. And I think the reactions to a lot of that work is valid, and that's where you get the slopification and where you get Elon Musk coming out and saying, well, I'm going to make my version of the Odyssey using AI by the end of the year and with all my values overlaid on it. And rightly so, I think people are reacting to that. But I think all the examples you've shown, what's really interesting there is that, yeah, there's a thoughtfulness and there's a reckoning with the realities, the limitations, and the advantages of the tool beyond just, let me see if I can do what other people were doing before this technology cheaper and faster. And I think that's, but I think the public perception with a lot of people in that camp is that they're putting everything in that bucket, as opposed to seeing the really interesting work emerge. And it's great to hear those examples, and I'm hoping, you know, we get more of that to really reckon with what this tool means for creatives and artists.
Yeah, I think it's a yes and situation. You know, everyone freaked out about digital and said, what's going to happen to celluloid? It's yes and. We can have purely human created work. We and also can have intervention with AI. What was it that you said, Bhautik? It's remediation and the other one is synthesis. Yeah, synthesis. It's a yes and. It's just another tool. Let's see what happens.
Christen, on this question of value of creative work and perception, both from creatives and audiences around AI-generated art or augmented art, I'm curious what you're seeing and hearing from people in the creative industries across the country around where that current sentiment is. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about like your own kind of sentiment and stance as well.
Yeah. I was remembering you said at the beginning that we might kind of declare where we sit. So yeah, I mean, I work at Creative Australia, and so much of our job is to support artists, and a lot of that is protecting IP, which is their ability to monetize their work. So that's professional artists, but also broadly to support the arts in Australia. And so that's a kind of more public value of the arts. And so when I think about AI, I often think about that form of value as well. I guess there's market value of the product and everything that means when art is taken up by training data without consent or compensation, but also, yeah, the value of creative production in this new kind of climate. What's creativity worth? What's creative work worth? Like actual creative labor. So I guess there, in my professional capacity, I think about those a lot as well. Of course, ICIP, First Nations Arts and Culture in Australia, the value of that, which can be a kind of market value, but isn't always. And there's a lot of social and cultural and other forms of value there. And then, I don't know, yeah, personally, I think about it a lot because I do have kids, Anna. So yes, at Creative Australia, our advocacy for the protection of IP often kind of works with this argument that IP is there as an incentive, right? It's an incentive to create if you're going to kind of work as a professional artist. Without that incentive, the idea of having a thriving arts and cultural sector that is professionalized in that sense is really hugely challenged. But yeah, also it's interesting. I do a lot of work at Creative Australia on arts, health and wellbeing as well. And I kind of speculate that there's an increasing conversation around the value of arts participation for health and wellbeing, which I kind of see against a backdrop of kind of increasing digitization and
A conversation that's challenging the value of participation for health and well-being, or emphasizing?
No. I think increasingly people are seeing the value of arts participation in relation to this idea of health and well-being.
Right.
And I wonder about the introduction of AI and the impacts that will have on that conversation because of this emphasis on the human in the act of creativity and the value in that act of self-expression. And in the kind of health and wellbeing space, there's a lot of talk about a contributing life. So if you feel that you are contributing meaningfully to society, then that positively kind of addresses your health and wellbeing. And the role the arts can play in that self-expression in the arts is seen as a real contribution to that. So when I think about value, there's a few dimensions to it, and certainly, the value of the product and how that would be recognised with legislation, but also social and cultural value and the different ways in which, creative production might kind of affirm a sense of one's purpose, and even like the pride that people have in their work. I guess how that becomes disrupted if your original question, I think, was what happens if anything can be generated. So I wonder about that. But I also really love Bhautik's metaphor of the map, and that these are tools and you can get to the edge of the map. So maybe not anything can be generated because these are still designed by kind of humans with their biases and their ideas of a product design. But the displacements that AI are presenting to that process of expressing oneself and what that means in the market, but also social and cultural value, things that, I kind of am musing on a lot, both professionally and more broadly.
Thanks, Christen. I'm curious to hear from others around this question of what do we need to preserve? How far do we push the practice and the experimentation past a line where we might be comfortable in order to know where that line is? And what are people discovering about what needs to remain human, or what will remain human, whether we like it or not, or whether the tech companies like it or not? Bhautik.
I mean, I have something I'm a little excited about. Just a little realization that I had the other day, right? Because we're in this moment right now where frankly, things are just kind of dreadful, right? And I don't mean to be naive here, but I think it's useful to sort of examine this moment that we're in to sort of find what's beautiful. And it's odd sort of talking about AI in this context, but here it is, right? Think about the reaction that we're seeing to AI art, right? We just did this mass experiment with, nearly everyone on the planet. Okay, what if a machine could make art? And we're looking at that reaction to that. And I think what it's done is that it's helped us rediscover and affirm the hidden beauty of art, right? That it's a vehicle for connecting with the human behind it. And I think the issue with, just especially on the synthesis side, where, the human involvement is very little, it sort of disintermediates that human connection, right? And we react to that, right? And it's like that moment that we had in the early 2000s where there was, I'm not going to say bad CG. It wasn't bad CG. It was just badly produced CG, right? Where people would sort of react to it and go, it wasn't finished, and it just felt sort of artificial. You felt like that it took away from the connecting to the human being that was the other side of it, the intent that was the other side of it, right? So, and what this comes down to is that, like, again, coming back to sort of like Anna's point, like it's about disclosure, right? And I think the experimentation is great. Like we've absolutely got to sort of find where the boundaries are. But if you don't disclose, the tools that you're using, right? If you sort of make it sort of hidden, the issue is that you respond to it like you just all of a sudden interacted with an imposter, right? And that feeling of sort of like betrayal that you get when you're interacting with an imposter, that's actually kind of a very human thing that's common to all of us, right? So I think, just I guess riffing on the idea of that, like in the experimentation should be as wide as we're comfortable with, but disclose what you're doing.
That's great, Bhautik. Yes, that imposter rings true. Having seen something incredible and then being told that, oh, that's AI generated, and you feel that sinking feeling. I've been cheated here. I've been lied to.
And just jumping in, Joe, you asked about our research earlier. We recently put out our most recent edition of the National Arts Participation Survey, which is where we get a sense from the general population, so not just arts audiences and participants, of how they're interacting with the arts. And in that, this time around, we ask questions about their sentiments towards AI, the use of AI for creative work. And yeah, there's a really strong, people are interested and people are using it, unsurprisingly. But alongside that, in a way that probably is not contradictory, as Anna would say, people want the AI to be disclosed, the use of AI to be disclosed, and for there to be regulation and transparency around that. So I guess it's a yes and.
And just look, a really simple point, just what we have to preserve. I'm a filmmaker, obviously, but is the beauty of sitting in the dark with fellow humans, watching work about what it is to be human. And I can remember George Miller, obviously, an early technology adopter, very across AI, was lucky enough to ask him a while ago what his feeling was about all of this. And he said that he didn't feel, no matter how sophisticated it got, that it would be able to give us something authentic in a way. And I'm not even sure what that means. I just want to float that out there because, you do get deceived. I mean, visually, some of these simulations, these illusions are almost seamless now, and certainly will be within the next year. But there's something deeper in there. Can a machine really ever replicate lived experience of being inside a carbon-based life form flesh bag? Or can it only ever simulate? And therefore, to me, it just comes back to the human brain and creator and soul needs to be controlling these tools and using them and adapting them, never the other way around.
Actually, I might take a moment to interrupt there, and I'll throw this one to Tyrone, because I think there's this phrase that we've got in the industry that good CG is invisible CG, right?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a parallel there for sort of like AI generated work? Is it one of those things where it gets, when we've found a good calibration for it, we're not going to mind so much because it feels seamless?
Yes, like I can give some examples. So, like we did for example, a film with a magpie in it, with Naomi Watts, and all of in CG, not in AI, and all the reviews that came out for that film was like, no one knew it was a CG bird. We did 500 shots, you know what I mean? And so we had a lot of artists that weren't really credited or lost the credit for doing and for us to do that, it's bravo to that team for pulling that trick off. Recently, we did an AI experiential sort of treasure hunt thing for the boy band BTS, who've got millions of followers, you know what I mean, around the world. And then they wanted to do some collateral, like, commercial collateral to promote it. And we did use our proprietary AI tool for that. And we did it so seamlessly that and I kind of hold my breath, because anything we've done that is AI, you look at the comments and they're horrendous. It's AI, it's crap, blah, blah. But in this one instance, we had millions of people look at this thing and not one person called it as AI. And so, it wasn't a human. It was just, without going into it, was like an object and all that sort of stuff. And we did use, and without going into how we did that, but there was definitely craft in it. So when I'm listening to everyone talk about disclosing AI, I don't know the answer to this question, but I have this question in my mind going, is that because, like, we're doing that too, just actually part of our process as we build in our pipelines. We've actually, and I actually find it quite creepy, but we've got AI tracking everything we do now, so that we can then disclose what everyone's done. And I'm a little bit unsure how I feel about that, because I can't do anything without with the AI tool going, okay, so I now know you did that, and I now know. So, you know, somewhere down the road, someone says, what, you know, please disclose. As a company, we can do that. But I question whether people care so much about the AI. I think that's why I'm trying to answer your question. Like, if people don't know it's AI, they don't care. They just want it to be good. And so, and even I think they sometimes know, there are examples where we've made work that looks good and you probably know it's AI or it has been disclosed and no one really cares because it's not slop and it's just good. So I do think that fundamentally, like my instinct feels that people don't actually care about it being AI as much as it just being poor work. And therefore what they care about is not the fact that it's AI, but it's the fact that that it's you know, it's you know, stealing IP, it's stealing jobs, you know, like AI's got all this bad sort of reputation to it. And so when something's done poorly, I think that kind of just gets magnified for the person. And that's what they react poorly to. But if the work is done and it's seamless and good, and I do think it's on a subconscious level, I think subconsciously people know what they're looking at. And it's exactly like your example of bad CG back in the day. It's like, I think subconsciously people know that craft went into it. Because I can tell you now, like when we do pull it off, it's like, you know, it's been a lot of sleepless nights to get there, you know, and it wasn't just, please make this. And so my last thing I want to mention is reacting to something you said also, it's exactly that. Like I feel, and I mean, I'm debating this with people a lot who are using it internally. Like a lot of people who are using it actually do believe that we should be listening to the AI and following it because it's so smart. You know what I mean? I don't believe that at all. And so I'm just, and so for me, but it's, I can see people, I mean, it's 50-50 split down the line in the way people interact with it, because I think 50% of people, from what I can tell, are actually just, you know, they just see it as a tool that just is so smart and can do so much that they just blindly go, you know, tell me what to do next, or be my voice, be my eyes, you know, be my soul, just to be dramatic. Do you know what I mean? But I'm definitely not that way inclined at all. I definitely think that it should be something that you as a person need to have enough self-confidence. And, you know, and I think it's a lot to ask of a human to be confident, you know what I mean? But so that's where I don't think you'll ever find the true balance. I think it'll always just be this yin and yang type kind of, you know,
Yes.
You know, black and white kind of approach to it, where, you know, you do need, I'm a confident person, so I can look at something like, you know, a big LLM and think to myself, you're not smarter than me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know, that takes a lot of kind of guts to think that way.
Well, it shouldn't though, right? Like we'll get to Q&A in a moment, but I just want to just tag on what you're saying there, that I believe the right relationship to be with this technology is as a tool. And I think what we're wrestling with is like, what kind of tool is it, so that we can be, and we know how to hold it. We know how to hold it without harming ourselves or others. And it's so easy to hold it incorrectly, or to let the tool use you, as you were saying, Tyrone. Many people kind of giving over their agency to the tool. And I think those are personally incorrect ways to relate to a tool. That's where we get into dangerous territory. So I love the work that, you know, you're talking about, that Anna's talking about, where it's about, no, how do we really like use it? All it's like exciting and dangerous elements too. How do we think about those as creatives and use them for the benefit of human connection or truth telling, or whatever the means of our art is? We've got some great questions coming through. We're not going to have time for all of them, but I would like to jump into one here. Someone asked, Stephen here asks, how would you advise using these tools in a way that remains ethical, in the sense that a client might be paying you for the craft of creating beautiful work? Does it matter that you're remediating versus synthesizing, and do clients understand the difference?
I'll give a quick answer to that. Like, we are using the tool for paid work. And I think when we do it, for me, it's very important. And I do ask questions up front where I kind of almost interview the person asking for the work so they can truly understand, you know, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I guess just so I have a clear conscience that we're doing it for the right reasons. And without going to exact examples, it might be, and I'm not saying the words, but this is an actual real example where, you know, I might bid a project to do it as a visual effects artist with a team, and it, you know, might be $1 million job that they just don't have the budget for that. And then I could come up with an AI solution that's quarter of that budget, which is significant, but, you know, still a budget. And then, you know, just interrogate that, is this ethically the right thing to do? And in this instance, it was. It's just a product flying in the sky. So you know, and so that brand is aware of it. I actually even interrogate saying, you know, people will have an adverse effect to this. You know what I mean? Like just having due diligence that people understand that they're actually, by engaging with it, they are opening themselves up to the experiment, the social experiment. And I think you need to just be open to that and accept the fact that, you know, you're taking a swing and you might miss. You know what I mean? And that's really where it's at the moment.
Thanks, Tyrone. Got another question coming here from Salome. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Not disclosing AI leads to audiences potentially feeling betrayed, as we mentioned. What would be the intended emotion that audiences should feel when media or companies disclose AI? Is it appreciation, for example, wow, that CGI or AI is so cool? Or is it a more neutral emotion like, okay, this tool was used to create this piece of media? I'm curious, Anna, or perhaps others, when it comes to why disclose, like what's the importance of that for an audience member? What's the intended effect or impact of that?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm just going to answer that specifically as it relates to this film I'm working on now. I think that disclosure and the nature of the disclosure, and indeed this really important question, Salome, which is what do we want the audience to think in disclosing, comes back to exactly the story you're telling and what you want your audience to think and feel about the journey you're taking them on. So, I believe that my use of deep fakes in this film, which is still in development, and who knows if it'll actually get made because it is in a grey zone, and Australia is waiting exactly for a test case to litigate what are permissible uses, as many VFX practitioners in Australia know, and we're all a little kind of wary about it. But what I'm trying to do in this film is a meta-narrative that is actually questioning what is screen truth. It's set slightly in the future. It is about a time where 90% of all web content is AI generated, where everyone is chronically online thanks to Meta, who has managed to give us the third space, not home, not work. Communities broken down, kids no longer play with each other, they're all online. And so for me, I feel that I actually need to use AI and then have it break down and erode. So I want to both stabilize assumptions about reality for the audience and then completely destabilize them, because I want to throw it back to the audience about what do they feel, because we are in an increasingly faked world. I mean, truth is a commodity. You know, the idea of corroborated factual expert-driven journalism is gone. Legacy media is dead. We need to be asking these questions and then dealing with them as a society. So that's why I'm doing it. Yeah.
Well, part of what I'm hearing there, Anna, is that it's empowering audiences with more of the truth to be able to discern and form their own views. It's trusting the audience essentially with the truth rather than trying to make them believe what you want them to believe.
We did one, this is quite a while ago, but we did one deep fake, I guess, media content where it was a person talking about suicide, and then it was revealed that this person had actually committed suicide. And obviously the family had agreed to that, and it actually did resonate. Even when making it, I was very conflicted in doing it. but it did land, and it did kind of do what it was intended to do, which was grow awareness for the police force in particular. It was just internally for the police force. So, you know, but that was using AI and then disclosing that it was AI in a kind of powerful way to make a point, I guess, and I guess stop people from committing suicide moving forward. So, you know, there's all these different ways that you can do these things, you know what I mean? And
Well, we might have to leave it there, but I suspect we could go on for another hour at least. I want to thank Bhautik, Christen, Anna, Tyrone. Thank you so much for your perspectives, your time, your energy, and your openness to sharing, your generosity. And it's exactly the mix that I'd hoped for. So genuinely, really grateful to you. I'm sorry, everyone, I couldn't get to all your questions in the Q&A. But I do want to thank everyone who joined us and stayed with it. The fact that this many people want to sit in on a conversation about these hard questions rather than easy answers tells you something about where we all are right now and what we're craving. If today resonated, if this conversation resonated, there are more coming. I've been working on a long form report called The Image Problem about making and faking and the trouble with visual AI. Digs into a lot of what we touched on today around trust and value, what happens to the image when anything can be generated. It's coming out in August. The best way to hear about that when it lands is to sign up to our portable newsletter. We're also running a second conversation in this series, this one for the design world. So it's called What's a Designer Now? And it's about how AI is redefining the role, the practice, and the value of design. That's on Thursday, 27th of August. And so again, stay tuned to our newsletter to be able to register for that. We've got another great panel. Luke Espanyol is the head of design at the University of Sydney. Pip Shea's a product designer at CSIRO. Mary Claire Monsalves, a senior design manager at the ABC. And our very own Aisling Costello, who's a principal human-centered AI designer at Portable. Really excited for that conversation. So stay tuned to the newsletter for registration soon. Again, thank you everyone for being here, for your questions. And thank you, Anna, Tyrone, Christen, Bhautik, for all the conversations to date and another fantastic one. And I hope it's not the last. So I appreciate you all.
Thanks for having me, folks.
Thank you.